people are really afraid because they lack confidence in the kitchen to swap things around, to make substitutes. And that's one of my favorite things that I hear from my readers and from people who have my book, my newsletter, follow me on Instagram, is like, you made me feel so confident in swapping.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back. Here we go again. This is the Dr. Drew Ramsey podcast, all about mental health, mental fitness. Really, really fun and special episode because we have got, before I read her bio, she is a recipe developer for Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, Carolyn Chambers, and she is just a wonderful friend. But it's so fun to reunite with her now because during COVID, we paired up. These recipes are delicious. They're amazing. I made the salmon burgers last night. And it was just such a wonderful partnership. And now, as you're going to hear, she herself is a New York Times best-selling cookbook author. So Caroline is a New York Times best-selling cookbook author. She's a recipe developer, a culinary expert based in Carmel Valley, California. Her journey began in her mom's kitchen in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and blossomed into a career as a chef, caterer, and freelancer for top brands and publications. Her first cookbook, Just Married, was published in 2018. And then during the COVID-19 pandemic, she connected with home cooks on Instagram. She's Caro Chambers, and she launched her hit Substack newsletter, What to Cook When You Don't Feel Like Cooking. Her latest cookbook, bearing the same title, was released in August 2024. And boom, instant New York Times bestseller, right to number one, right? I mean, it's like, bam.
It was number 2, but I'll take it. We can pretend it was number 1.
Number 2. I mean,
you know, Atomic Habits just has been stealing that spot for too long. So I'll take number 2.
She also just lives with her husband, George, who's also a veteran and Navy veteran, I believe. And their 3 sons, Mattis, Callum, and Cashel. Caroline Chambers, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to see you.
Oh, it's so great to see you. We finally forced ourselves to hit the record button because we had so much to catch up on and chat about. It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me on.
I love that we got to work together and know each other. And so I really appreciate how it is that you got so popular on Substack and why your book should be a bestseller, because you write, your recipes are really practical and delicious and feel very family oriented to me, but also really kind of healthy and achievable.
Yes.
And
those are all words that I strive for. So thank you.
Well, I wonder if you can just share a little bit, because I hope a lot of people are listening, care about nutritional psychiatry, and are thinking about brain food, thinking about this mental fitness concept, our e-course and book, Healing the Modern Brain, right? How we can do more in our everyday life to take care of our mental health and mental fitness. And you've shared a little bit about how, as we started to work together, some ideas about recipes and some ideas about your thinking about food shifted. I wonder if you could share a little bit about that.
Yes. I think we were just saying we're so happy that we met because we get to be friends now. But I think no one is happier than my followers and the people who love my recipes, because working with you on Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, and I basically was one of your early readers because I had to read the book to understand what these recipes were that I was developing. Why was I developing the way that I was? You know, I would get through a recipe, send it to the next person who was like a nutritionist who would kind of check off certain boxes. And you'd call me and say, hey, we need more selenium in that recipe. And I'd be like, okay, I've never developed a recipe specifically to make sure we have enough selenium. Like, let me think. That was Brazil nuts, right?
That's Brazil nuts.
It's been a sec. Right. So I'm like, okay, let me think about how, because Brazil nuts have a kind of strong taste. Like, they're not the easiest to fit into a recipe. Okay, let me think about how we can fit those in. So red bell peppers, kale, cashews, almonds, those are all things that were really highlighted in this book. You had what, 9 key players.
There are 12 essential nutrient, and then these power players. You're right.
Power players. And so the way that I cooked, I used to just, the red bell pepper thing is a great example and one that I talk about all the time. I used to cook mostly just like for A, obviously flavor, but B, aesthetics. So if I'm making a salad, I'd use 1 yellow bell pepper, 1 orange bell pepper, and 1 red bell pepper. I now know from working with you that the red bell peppers have the most of everything, the most superpowers, right? And so I'm like, okay, F it. I'm not using an orange bell pepper just because it will make this salad prettier. Like a red salad is just as pretty. I'm using all red bell red bell peppers there. Another great example is like cashews. In another and in another world, I might have used like peanuts as the sprinkle on top of a salad, but I'm like, no, cashews have like actual nutrients that are actually changing our bodies and our minds. Like, I'm going to go that direction. I think about it almost every single time I'm writing a recipe. Like, if there's a soup, I'm like, how can I work kale into this? How can I work a green into this? Do I blend up some cashews and add them to thicken the soup? I really think about that book that you wrote and I got to write the recipes for almost every single time I'm developing a recipe. So much now that it's just like muscle memory. It's like in there deep in my brain. It's like how I develop a recipe now is like, okay, does it check all these boxes? If it doesn't have any sort of like nutritional boost, like what is its purpose? Is it just a comfort food, great thing, cozy dish? Okay, that serves a purpose too. But like I'm gonna talk about that and mention if you want to add greens, like here's a great way to add them into the meal.
Yeah, and you had so many wonderful, delicious desserts in the book as well, and so there was a lot of comfort food in there. But thank you so much for that. I really appreciate how nutrient density, or this idea that along with the aesthetic and the amazing flavor, which is true about all these recipes, and all of your recipes, adding in a little bit more nutrient density, thinking about some of those foods that maybe act a little bit extra punch. Not that we can't have some peanuts, and not that that
Exactly.
amazing tricolor salad with all the bell peppers is super fun. But if you're just kind of looking at the day in, day out foods to maybe stock your fridge with, stock your kitchen with, getting those with a little bit more nutrient density does make a difference over time in terms of our dietary pattern and what we eat. Um, as you work with people and you think about food, or maybe when you go over to someone's house, are there certain things that are just these like tips that recurrently you have for home cooks, especially with your new book when we don't feel like cooking? Boy, that's a problem. So everybody listening has, right? Where it's just we all have
Yes.
that day where
Even
it's
if you
like,
love cooking,
oh yeah, and it's just like, oh, I don't want to do it.
can't.
What gave you the idea for the book? And I want to get right to for everybody listening, and part of what I really want folks to understand with this episode is how to take that feeling and do something great with it, and how to adapt some of what Caroline's learned in terms of how to take a feeling and be in a spot that we're often in where we don't feel like engaging with our food, and then to do something really wonderful for ourselves.
I think first, like, no one really recognizes why we don't feel like cooking, and they're just like, it's a slog, I have to do it every day, like, I'm sick of it, we're just gonna order Postmates." But there's, like, so much, like, history to why we never feel like cooking, like, I mean, you could write a whole book on this, but, like, our mother's generation was, like, one of the first generations where everyone was really cooking, right? And so they were getting home or everyone was really working, excuse me. They were all like really in the workforce for the first time was like our mom's generation. And so suddenly like they all knew how to cook maybe from their mothers, but even their mothers were starting to get into the workforce like and it became this sort of like feminist thing like I have a job. I don't have to cook every single meal. And then like the microwave was invented and like all of a sudden there were microwavable meals and so like that became the replacement. There's all this like I always think like if I was a historian it would be the really fun thing to write the history of like when did we stop cooking as an American culture? But basically, we now all are adults. We're supposed to cook. We're supposed to like cook home cooked meals for our family. There's all these like memes and stuff of like, I didn't know when I signed up to be a mom that like all of a sudden I would have to decide, 3 meals a day for 5 people for the rest of my life. And it's exhausting. Like, it's exhausting to have to think about food that much. And there's a lot of reasons for it. Like,
I just want to say it's embarrassing when you're in the rut that I think you've done such a nice job of highlighting where I'm like, so there's pasta. That's yeah,
pasta
there's that
exists.
there's
Uh
that,
huh.
and I can't actually in this moment think of any other food I could cook for my
Mm
family,
hmm. Mm hmm.
and I'm gonna stand here in the kitchen kind of upset with myself and
Like
embarrassed
bummed.
and bummed
Yes.
and, like,
Yes.
shameful and really
Yeah, it's kinda depressing, and it's, like, depressing to be in that spiral, and then there's also those of us who have children or even a picky spouse, we get into this feedback loop of, "Okay, I spend an hour, I make the dinner, I serve it to everyone, they all tell me they hate it. They all tell me, 'I'm not gonna eat that.' They all tell me." And that feedback loop of, like, negative feedback every time I put effort towards a meal, like, no, that doesn't feel good. That doesn't make us feel like happy or contented in doing something. So we don't want to do it. So guess what? we don't feel like cooking.
Yeah, I stopped doing that also because I don't want my children to see me cry that much when they reject my cooking. I'm just like, it's like, "Don't worry, guys. It's just andropause again. It's okay."
Some of my least favorite times of like thinking about myself as a mother are when I'm feeding my kids meals. I'm so frustrated and like disappointed that they won't eat the things that I want to eat and they won't try new things and like so I'm like angry at them. I'm like just try it. Like I know you'll like it. It tastes so good and they won't do it. And so that negative feedback loop of like okay, even if I try to make them a delicious dinner, they're still not going to eat it. Like all of that adds up to all of us not feeling like cooking. So I have this section in the beginning of my cookbook that is like a lighthearted thing. And it's 19, I think, ways to make yourself feel like cooking, even when you really, really don't feel like it, is the header of it. And it's tips basically to like trick yourself and find ways to make the cooking process more enjoyable. So, one of my favorite, I'm a romance reader. Like, I used to read like hardcore literature only, like, you know, Jonathan Safran Foer and Jonathan Franzen and all the people, all the Jonathans, and really like, you know, literature. And I gave it up basically after I had my second son. I was realizing that I was only getting through like one book a month. And I used to really love reading. And I was like, this is just like making me sad. And like, it's not making me in a good place. And I picked up a romance book. A friend was like, "Read this," and I was like, "I don't really read books with like pink covers." And she was like, "Okay, snob, like just give it a try." And it was like the most enjoyable. It was better than watching, you know, a rom com. It was better than like a glass of wine with a friend. It was like this total escape. I had two young sons at this time. My life's hectic, and I like escaped into this romance book. And so it's like one of my tips for people when they're like, I'm just feeling like I'm like in a rut in my life. I'm like, have you tried reading romance? So one of my tips for feeling like cooking is put in a romance book, or maybe it's a podcast for you, or whatever it is that like really allows you that escapism. Like get out of it. Like for my husband, it's those murdery podcasts. What are they called? True crime. True crime podcast. Like he loves them. He's like in another world. He's escaping from his stressful, working parent life. So for him, it's a true crime podcast. For me, it's a romance book. So like pop in a book in your headphones and chop the carrots and like be reading the book in your head, but like your body is going through the motions of cooking the dinner. So that's one. Like call your mom is another. Call your sister. If you think like cooking is a waste of time and you're really busy working and parenting, do little exercises in your kitchen while you're cooking. So like you can do squats, you can do calf raises, you can like do all these things while you're chopping a carrot, and it makes it feel kind of like, okay, I'm actually knocking out two birds, one stone thing. But yeah, basically, you're not alone. You're not, failing because you don't feel like cooking your family dinner. It is really hard. And basically, the recipes in this book are just the quickest, easiest versions of like really delicious food that I would still want to eat. Like, I don't want the like, you know, throw it in a crock pot, have like all soft food. Like, that's not me. I'm a really good cook, but I'm a really in a busy place in my life right now. I've got three young kids, trying to keep my marriage happy, like everything in life is so much work when you're in this stage. And so I want really delicious, like restaurant worthy food, but just faster. And so this book is full of really good recipes that won't make you, really sad to have to cook.
I feel as a psychiatrist, I want to intervene everybody a little bit around this idea of when I imagine your dinner table and you've cooked this amazing meal and you're feeling frustrated because the
Please
boys
intervene.
aren't divvying. And I'm wondering what the intervention is there. And sometimes people feel hesitant to like cook something different for the kids. And I don't have a lot of hacks for this, but I wonder if there are ways, sometimes where there's like the adult version and the kid version,
Yeah.
and or if there are other ways that you've found to kind of, because you're better at this than I am, to kind of solve this. Because I agree, I know what you mean. I hate it when I like put in effort and I'm not a great cook, so my kids are much more permitted to reject it, I think, than yours, because yours are all going to be delicious. But you put in the effort to make
No.
it nice or have them try, or as you said, they're going to love it. Like, for example, our daughter ate octopus last night. She like ordered this salad in a Japanese place that had octopus, and then she ate it and she's like, oh. And when she was a baby she really liked octopus, which was especially like the little baby ones. It was almost like concerning, to be honest. But
Yeah.
now it's like, it's fine. We want you to eat the octopus, like, teen girl. And she devoured, she loved it. And it was just one of those wonderful, I think, moments that you're going to have lots of as a parent. Don't worry, where they surprise you. Or like our son, someone asked, like, what's your favorite food? And he said, rainbow trout. I feel like I've said that on every
That
podcast
you must
episode.
have felt so smug, just like, "My son," and he's 10?
Is Yeah, he was. I think he was 9 at the time, just to
Oh, you are such a
just to
brat.
flex. I think maybe it's just age depressed me. I definitely messed it up. But the point being, I think with your boys, and I think for everybody listening, those of you that have older kids, I bet you all know this. And for those of us with younger kids, it's something that you see, get glimpses of, and when they're really young, it's hard. Where kind of that faith that they're gonna develop into eaters, and that they're gonna sort out a palate, and that they're gonna try all the foods.
Yes.
Um,
On most days, I am able to have that level-headed look at, like, "Okay, this child is 5, this child is 4, this child is 2. They will not go to college still, refusing to eat anything with a speck of green on it. Like, this will pass. This too will pass," is, I think, the best parenting phrase. "This too will pass. They will one day eat rainbow trout. They will one day try octopus. Like, it's fine." But there's other days when I've been, like, working my ass off all day. They get home, I wanna hang out with them, but, like, crap, I forgot to cook dinner earlier before they got okay, I gotta cook dinner, and then I, like, wanna sit around the dinner table and have a lovely meal with them, and they are just "want, want, want" the whole time, and it's, like,
I love it.
so
You're ready
defeating.
for your boys to like be 20, where they're gonna be
Yeah,
so in love with you. They're
but
gonna be
also I'm
like,
so obsessed with babies that I just want them to stay babies forever.
that part is very hard for all of this. Can I ask what some of your solutions are? Because when you find yourself in that situation, and maybe some of the recipes from the new book, in terms of, because I think everybody listening, we all do end up in that, whether you have kids or not, where we end up in that moment we don't feel like cooking. I love this idea, and I encourage everybody listening in a kind of mental fitness way to do a little thinking about how this feeling manifests for you, and where it comes from. I think your idea, this kind of brief history of how our gender dynamics at work shifted, how expectations of women shifted, how feminism ideals has I have kind of influenced how we think about food, how we think about matriarchal home building efforts. Just in a couple sessions with someone about, like, how do we give credit to a partner, just period, a partner, man or woman, who's doing cooking, doing home organizing, house engineering? Can we make that a little more gender neutral for the daddies who are working a little part time, but just crushing it on the daddy front? Or daddies who have periods of unemployment. I speak with a number of folks in the situation where there's, like, no credit for that, where you're really taking care of the family.
The labor of the home is so not seen. It's funny because my job you asked a question, and I totally forgot what it is because now I'm on this, but it's funny, my job is such a, like, traditionally, female-centered thing, like, my job is food, and traditionally the woman was home cooking the meals for the family, and now I'm in this world where, like, actually I'm crushing, like, I'm making great money, I'm have the number 1 Substack, blah, 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 New York Times, blah, blah, and
Say it. You shouldn't
it's
blah, blah, blah. You should say it. You have
it's
the
New York
top
Times.
recipe Substack and the number 2 New York Times best-selling cookbook.
And it's all related to this, like, feminist thing, so when it does come down to it, it's funny, my I can't remember why, but my friends yesterday were like, "George, you are so lucky. Caroline cooks you every single meal." Like, George doesn't cook a meal, and it's because cooking is my job. I'm constantly like, even if we don't have dinner ready, like, I don't give George the opportunity to share the labor of the kitchen and of cooking. Like, I don't give him that opportunity ever. So it's not fully his fault. But feeding our family is 100% my cross to bear. It's my burden. Sometimes it's my joy, sometimes it's my burden, and he shares none of that, and it is an interesting thing, like, we're both entrepreneurs, we both work bajillion hour weeks, and yet I'm the one constantly being the one feeding the family, which is,
Now,
like, a
do
little
you
bit of
how do
a
you I mean,
funny thing.
everybody in their couples sort of figures this out, in their partnership. Does he do, certain tasks, like he does the shopping and the takes out the trash and, certain
Are you
activities?
familiar with the Fair Play? method at all. Okay, you would love Eve Rodsky was a lawyer, and I say lawyer because I'm Southern lawyer, and she had a kid and suddenly realized that like the balance in her home was like everything was so imbalanced. She was doing everything for the kid and her husband was also working, but she was also trying to work and like what was this? And so she created this method called the fair play method where you like can divide the labor of your home in a more equitable way. So it's like cards. It's literally a deck of cards and it's like taking care of the dog, taking care of the mortgage, the childcare, and you're supposed to own each card entirely. So it's not George saying, hey, I want to go on a date. You need to book a babysitter and having to remind me, you book a babysitter, you book a babysitter. It's him saying, hey, let's go out on Thursday, and me taking the full mental labor of like, okay, I need to book a babysitter. I'm going to book a babysitter if I own the childcare card. If he owns the childcare card, he does the whole thing. Taking out the trash. It's not taking the mental labor off of me if I have to remind you every Monday night to take the trash cans out. But if so, you have to own the task through its entirely.
Is there a card to how to deal with that specific problem, having to
There
be reminded?
literally is a card with you flinched. You so you this is a thing in your home.
The reminder,
Oh, the reminder.
the
Yeah, yeah. No,
reminder.
it's a card. The whole card. You own the entire task. So whatever that looks like, whatever you have to set up a timer in your calendar on Monday night to remind you to take the trash out. Whatever it is, you have to own it entirely.
I like this. It also forces couples to confront the things that you need to change about yourself. Because there's some way that, like, if you're the person who's taking out the trash in your partnership, and that's your job, kind of forgetting being reminded, it's really not doing your job in your partnership.
Not
So
doing your job.
that I like these cards. Do you think there's something about getting the card and owning it and holding it that kind of makes it more concrete for people? It's more clear, like, hey, you took this on, like you committed. If I feel let down or disappointed, or the trash isn't taken out, or the
Yeah.
kids aren't fed, or there's no date night, it's clear who's responsible for that.
I think that, and I think also looking at the end, and this actually, she says, like, don't compare the size of your stacks. Like, that's not what it's about because maybe one of you is a stay at home parent. And so you're willing to take on more of the stack. It's about your spouse seeing the size. Like, I have a friend who did it. I think there's 100 cards, and like, her husband had 3 and she had 97, and she was like it was honestly just the best thing because she was like, "I wanted to own them, like, I am willing to own them, I want them," but his face when he saw that stack of cards, he was like, "Oh, damn, okay, now I recognize the labor of the home, this, like, this tremendous, you know, what burden's the wrong word, but it keeps popping into my mind, like, this tremendous effort that you are
I
doing,
like
like,
could we call it responsibility?
responsibility, thank
I
you.
mean,
This
you have like,
tremendous responsibility and
yeah.
work. It's labor, it's work.
Well, you have 3 young boys, you have 3 young brains. You also, feeding your husband and yourself. And it's an incredible responsibility, whether it's just the basic nutritional psychiatry. Those are 5 amazing brains. They have all amazing potential, but only if they get the right nutrients. But also, just I think it's something about said the notion of a matriarch, right? Of part of that owning that responsibility is note your friend of kind of feeling very good and proud that
Yeah,
she's sort of owning these responsibilities. I wonder, can I ask you? There's a trend around sort of social media and kind of out there around. I think it's called trad wife, right? A traditional wife, and it has all kinds of different connotations. And it strikes me you're both like an entrepreneur, making it modern woman, feminist, and also you're talking about some attributes of that. What do you think of this trad wife phenomena?
well, I think it's so interesting because I think part of the phenomenon or part of their thinking, the trad wife, like, philosophy is, like, I stay home and I just take care of my husband, like, that's my whole job, but they're, like, making a living off of doing it on social media, so it's a very interest I mean, I think it's awesome. In some, I think it's great. I think when it becomes, "This is what the wife is supposed to do," she is which a lot of it is, like, every now and then my algorithm will just be, like, pure trad wife content, and I'm like, "How did this happen to me?" And a lot of the way they talk around it is like the world is wrong right now. The wife is supposed to be home taking care of her husband. It'll be like tips on how to make your man happy. And it's like whenever they get home, you go outside and you go out to their car and you give them a hug, you greet them with a kind face, you dress in a nice outfit. And so those really kill me. Those I'm like, what is happening here?
And the
Um,
idea of killing you there is that this is a representation that you don't get to be an authentic person in this relationship.
yeah, maybe that like they think that being a working woman and not having the time to like have on like a dress and have a cocktail waiting for them is like bad. That's wild to me that that's like a message that's being pushed right now and like appreciated so much clearly because it's like trendy and popular. But generally speaking,
Well,
I
the boys always want their mommies, you know, it's like a sickness in a certain way that the male regression to that notion, right?
they
I
want to
don't
be
need you to
cared
be
for
a
and coddled
yeah,
and
I don't need you to be an independent person with free will. I need you to be a servant,
yes. I
of
mean, the content it'll literally be like, don't tell him if you had a hard day. Like it's like that stuff feels really tough for me. But generally speaking, I am like I love that there's people out there living that life, and I love that I'm living this life. And some of the trad wives are not so preachy, like you're living a horrible life by being the way you are. They're just like, this is what I like to do, and I feel really great about it. And those I really like. I think Ballerina Farm. Are you familiar?
no.
Okay, so Ballerina Farm's been like huge in the news and in the press. They're Mormon in Utah, I assume. And they're Mormons and they have maybe 9 kids at this point, and she was a Juilliard dancer. I don't know, they're tremendously wealthy and own this big farm in Utah. And they've been really in the news. She has millions of Instagram followers and her content is like I'm making the kids a sandwich and she's making the dough from she's going out milking the cow, making the cheese by hand, making the bread by hand, but it's like beautiful and she's beautiful and her children are beautiful and you can't help but watch it. And the reason I brought her up, she never is like, I greet Daniel at the door with, his favorite smile of mine and I'm wearing his favorite. It's like, but that is what some of the trad wives. So she's getting lumped into the trad wives as like the leader of the trad wives because she kind of started this like, I want to make a sandwich. I'm going out like picking the wheat to grind into the flour. She kind of started that and made it this like beautiful aspirational thing, but she is not preaching this gospel of like woman must be subservient to man. She's just kind of doing it and but not saying this is how it must be. So I love her content. She gets a lot of flack of like, you know, she's saying the wrong messages. She competed in the Miss America contest like 2 weeks after giving birth to her ninth child, and everyone was like, "This is giving the wrong message. Like, women should be, bounce back culture, blah blah blah." And to that, I say, like, let her live her life. That's what she wanted to do. You gotta go. You gotta go read this article. There's millions of articles about her. It's fascinating.
I wonder if you're also noting some of the kind of very quaint and traditional notions, almost like Americana notions, that are part of all of us, part of an appeal. This idea that none of us really know how to make cheese or milk a cow or make a sandwich from scratch, and it calls back. There's something to me. It feels so incredibly powerful, not in service of the man, but as this responsibility and this knowledge of being able to uh, you know, like take dirt and effort and sunshine and water and like turn it into nourishment for your family,
Yeah,
especially
it's
growing up
so cool.
closer to that and living in that for a little while with our kids, that just doing a little bit of that. And I grew one field of wheat,
Yeah. Did you
trying to
really?
yeah, I thought I should try and at least just like make one loaf of bread from scratch. And same thing with goats. We had I had some, I leased some lactating goats. That was a strange thing moving back to the farm from New York City as a psychiatrist. And the rumor on the town is like, you hear what Ramsey's up to? He's leasing lactating goats from Veronica Portillo. It's true though. I did rent her lactating goats. I'm just going to be, and we made goat cheese, which is really easy to make. And
Wait,
you get to
so
make
sorry, just Very short interruption. How long did you keep the lactating goats?
We had them for about 2.5 months, if I recall.
Okay. And okay, keep going.
You keep milking them, they keep lactating, and it was a really interesting relationship to have with an animal. I never had something, dependent on me like that for
Right, because
animal
they would get sick
husbandry.
if you yeah.
Yeah, so you show I mean, in the morning, like, first thing, like, we'd load up the kids and we'd go down to the barn and the golf cart with the coolers, and they're waiting for you. They're like actually, if you get to they're, like, kinda standing up, and if you wait too long, you feel bad because 'cause they're kinda leaking, and they're, like, clearly like, "Hello, who slept in?" And then it's just a wonderful thing. You milk them, it's just, a lovely, kind of ritual. You have to milk them every day, then you take them out into the pasture, and there's this way that so the closest experience I've had to being a shepherd, where you're just out with the animals as they're grazing, and such a part of the food cycle we don't really get to experience much. I think almost everyone who's listening who's experienced some part of that, maybe a milk goes, but just being out with animals in the nature
Uh-huh.
like that, it's such a piece of call it like traditional farm culture that is really quite, there's like an intimacy to it and an interrelatedness to it that's so grounding.
We bought the house that we now own, in 2020, yeah, early 2020, and they had 10 chickens and they had to move suddenly, so they wanted to leave them, and we were like, "Absolutely."
The
And I
house
have to
came with
say
10 chickens.
yeah, the house came with 10 chickens. That was a part of our negotiations. We kept the chickens, and we've never, like, so much as grown a tomato before we owned this house, and suddenly having these, like, 10 chickens who really they depend on you. They need you. You gotta feed them. You gotta clean their coop, da, da. It is a really cool like, I love having the chickens be a part of our life, and now that our oldest sons are old enough to help us care for them, like, they almost do it entirely by themselves, and, like, that feels very cool that they have that, and then they would eat the eggs if they would eat scrambled eggs, Drew, but they won't.
We can bring them in. We can have, like, a family intervention. My son's a very picky eater, just to, I think and
Okay,
lots
but
of
he likes
people
rainbow
listening
trout.
have picky eater kids. Yeah, that's an impressive one, but as with many things, they're and
And they're
there
not
are
gonna go to college only eating, whatever.
we can make a bet. I think we should check in. I think hopefully everybody's listening when your kids go to college, and we can come back and see, but I think they're gonna be eating a lot more foods than that. Um I'm wondering, about some of your favorite kind of I don't wanna call them hacks, but sort of moves in the kitchen. I see you do a lot of things on your Instagram and in your books and your recipes that just make things, like, faster and simpler. I don't mean to, like, switch subjects so quickly.
No,
Oh,
let's
and we
go.
can't leave kitchens
From
before I'm sorry.
lactating goats to
Before we do that, though, we have to just chickens for you and the boys and George, for my family to yours, since nutrient density in red bell peppers and kale kind of was a transfer, I would highly recommend, and I might have mine, I can mail you if you want, but I highly recommend you incubate, a flock.
oh, I want to.
Yeah, it's really when the kids are young like this, there's not much like it. It's amazing how just at like I think it's 28 days, 27 days, you hear like the peep, 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 and they come out of the shell and they imprint on you. It's really one of the most transcendent experiences I had on a farm.
I really wanna do it. So we have 3 chickens remaining from the first
That's
f
pretty good. I mean,
which is
that's
pretty
like
good.
not bad.
Don't
It's amazing to have any left.
thank you. I was like, are people gonna judge me for this?" But no, they were already, like, 4 years old, so and they have a short
They
life
also
and
just get
also
eaten, everybody. I mean, it's horrible, but it's just what happens.
also mountain lions. So
Yeah.
anyway, we have 3 left and they're the meanest ones, which is it was like full survival of the fittest. And so we had to evacuate for fires a couple years ago and our neighbor took them, a neighbor who was outside of the evacuation line took them and they just ripped her chickens. Just the pecking order is a real thing. They were so mean to her chickens. So I can't introduce a new flock, I don't think, until these mean chickens die, right? Don't I have to wait? Or will they, like, take the babies as their own?
I think it's called chicken soup.
That's what George keeps saying. He's like, "These chickens are mean and they only make, like, 1 egg a week now because they get what, less and less fertile? I don't know. They stop making as many
They just get
eggs.
old. They're like, yeah, I mean, they're just like the rest of us. We're
They're just
making
like the
less
rest
of.
of us. They're dropping less eggs. Joe George is like, "It's time for chicken soup," and I'm like, "I don't know if I can do it."
I think that's it's interesting to do if you haven't. It's hard if they're sort of pets and you've been with them for a while, but it's certainly like part of the life cycle and part of the farm cycle. That's
And
kind of
otherwise, they just die and their bodies just rot.
right. I mean, there's something about that about using them and being with them or communing with them in that way. I mean, there's that reverence that we don't really have for meat and for animals on a farm in the same way, in part because we're so removed from this process. So
Right.
it could be like maybe in the same time you're incubating, that's when you can also harvest, and it can be like a full cycle of the chicken life.
I'll never forget the first time my now 5-year-old made the connection of, like, the chicken on his plate and the chickens down there. Like, he was like, "What are we having for dinner?" And I was like, "Chicken." He was like he'd, like, just been down the chicken coop, and he was like, "Chicken?" I was like, it was the weirdest thing because 'cause we'd talked about eating chicken a million times before. He had been in the chicken coop a million times before, but it was like his brain had just, like, formed the ability to make that, like, neural connection. I was like, "Oh, interesting. This is a new thing." And I was like, "Yeah, dude, we eat chickens, just not those."
It's a definitely, I think, removed from a farm. It is a strange thing where the idea that it's almost like we want to stay away from that idea. Like, don't put those two things together. Like, don't think about it too
Yeah.
much.
I mean, it's why we call beef, not cow, right? Isn't that a thing? Isn't that why we call beef?
I don't know. I didn't. I don't know.
I
I
think
mean,
so. I think that we call beef because of, like, marketing.
really, because people didn't want to say like a cow steak, huh?
Yeah, yeah, eating cow for dinner. I think it was that. It was, like, separating the 2. Like, beef is a product, cow is an animal.
Well, um, with our and everyone, these recommendations for you too. I highly recommend you incubate some eggs and have some chicks. I think it's a really wonderful experience at some point in your life. And I
And
think
even with a tiny backyard, you can do it. They don't need a lot of space.
and then even the recommendation of being involved in some sort of animal harvest, whether if you eat meat, whether it's going fishing with some friends or whether it's going to a butchering event, it's part of the process. I think a lot of people kind of shy away from and miss. Brings up a lot of feelings for all of us, but maybe it's my part of my, I don't know, extreme mental fitness attitude of we should sit with these ideas. It's a life cycle, a farm cycle we're part of.
Mhm.
Kelly, I want to get back to that question though, because you're such a great chef and recipe developer, and everyone listening also needs probably some helps and some tips from you in the kitchen. And so, can you share, especially for families, what are some of the things that really work for you in terms of when you're not feeling like cooking that you end up being able to whip together pretty quickly? What are the things we should be buying and storing?
So I think one of the reasons that people really hate I think there's 2, like, major things outside of the feminism and history that we already discussed that is, like, my very, I don't know, high up theory. There's 2, like, really tactical things that I think after a really busy night are, like, why we don't feel like cooking. Number 1, I think people's, like, kitchen skills, so especially their knife skills, daunt them. They are not strong, they don't feel confident with a knife, and you have to basically cook, like, chop to do everything. And so taking, like, 30 minutes of your time and watching, like, YouTubing a knife skills video, grabbing a bag of carrots, and just practicing your knife skills on a Saturday when you feel like improving a skill, like, I feel like extreme mental what is it? Extreme mental
Extreme
fitness?
mental fitness.
Extreme mental fitness, for me as an adult, I find that learning a new skill is like makes me feel on top of the world. Like when George was in grad school and we were living in Palo Alto, I took up golf for 2 years and like I haven't played since, but it was like the most fun. It was a way to get out. And I every day when I got better at my swing and better at doing things, I felt better. So if you are not confident with a knife, take 30 minutes, an hour, and just like practice your knife skills, become confident in what it means to chop, dice, roughly chop, and you will hate cooking less, I promise you, because you will feel more confident while you're doing it and it feels good to be confident. Number 2 is the dishes. I think that people are like, I can't cook because then it's this massive stack of dishes. Like, I'm so sick of doing the dishes. So, there's a ton of one pot sheet pan meals in the book and on my newsletter because of that. So pick if you really don't feel like cooking ever, ever, ever. The book is the chapters are by how long the recipes take. So they're 15-ish minutes, 30 minutes, 45, an hour, a little bit longer. And the a little bit longer, don't be daunted by that because it's basically like rub a marinade on some pork, throw it in the oven, and like 6 hours later it's ready. So those recipes are actually some of the easiest. But if you are really hating cooking, you're in one of these cooking ruts, like we talked about at the beginning of the episode. If you're in a cooking rut, go to the 15-minute chapter and find something you love and make that every single week until you're completely sick of it. I think people feel the need to like constantly reinvent the wheel when it comes to cooking and cooking for their family. They're like, I got to try something new. No, make an iPhone note that's like the 5 meals that your family will eat right now. Write a grocery list for each of them that has like the checky boxes, on an iPhone note, the checky boxes. And then every time it's time to grocery shop, just copy and paste that into a grocery list and make the same meals over and over. Go to the well until the well is empty. And then once everyone's sick of it and like, Mom, I can't do it again, that's when you introduce a new recipe. Like, don't feel, and this is coming from somebody who sells recipes. Like, I write recipes because I want you to constantly be trying a new recipe. If you're in a rut, if you're like having a hard time getting the family to love it, whatever, don't do that. Just keep making the same recipes over and over and over again.
I like this idea of
Um,
finding hits, and also there's a way that instead of it needing that kind of automatic, I don't know, I always get talked about like dopamine these days. I'm not sure that's exactly true, but this idea of always needing new, fresh, different, and that kind of I love you're picking up on I'm going to call it like a type of pathology that drives. But we're
yeah.
always needing to do a new recipe, and we have that we're just gonna say utterly ridiculous expectation of ourselves. Just like
Yes.
as much as we're talking about the more of an influencer who makes bread from scratch by growing the wheat, it's like that is not the standard that people should or can hold themselves
Right.
to. And I like the idea of finding a hit and then playing it for a while.
And also, every time you cook a new recipe, it is like learning another new skill in a way. So like on a Wednesday night after you've like done 3 baseball practices and worked all day or whatever it is in your household that makes you not feel like cooking, do you feel like practicing a new skill then? No, save that like awesome new recipe from my book or from my newsletter or whatever. Save that for like a Saturday when maybe one of your kids wants to cook with you. Maybe you had a few hours off to like recharge yourself. Save it for that day when you're like feeling a little bit like cooking to cook the new thing, or just go to the 15-minute chapter of my book and cook it on a Tuesday night when you're exhausted because it'll be over in 15 minutes.
How about a little inspo for the folks, I'm gonna say a little bit like me, who don't do enough trying new recipes and cookbooks? And I think the reason I don't, and a lot of people listening probably have other reasons. Mine is like yours, which is that the kids don't. The kids, they eat some stuff, but I don't want to like make a big meal and then have nobody eat it, and it's like total. I don't know. So if you could help me
What's
with my problem, and
Yes.
then everybody else with just some of that as well, like
So
getting
you actually
inspiration.
you started to ask to we started to talk about this earlier and then we have had a million things to talk about so we got off track. But one thing you were going to ask I think earlier in this conversation was how do I, if I want to cook the new thing, I want to cook the beautiful meal, how do I like make that kid friendly so that we can all be happy? And that especially in the newsletter, just because I have more space, I have more real estate to talk about things like this, but also in the book I share a lot of like picky eater tips. But in the newsletter, almost every single recipe. So I share a new recipe every single Saturday in the newsletter. And almost every single one, unless it's like mac and cheese. So it's like, if your kids don't like this, sorry. Almost every single recipe is like, here's how to feed a picky eater with this. So for instance, last week was this really delicious soup that you would love. That's a chicken, mushroom, and leek and farro soup. It's so good. It's like lemony and the broth is delicious and it's fabulous. And my kids wouldn't touch soup. My two-year-old loves soup, of course, because two-year-olds rock. But my 5 and 4-year-old like wouldn't touch soup with a 10-foot pole. They're like
Like any
gross.
soup, like soup
Oh,
phobia.
any soup. There's like too much stuff in it. Like I don't know. I feel like I just like I failed somehow. Like, I mean, that's a ridiculous thing to say. I know as my therapist, you would be like, Caroline, don't say you failed. But I feel like I just didn't introduce it to them at the right time, or I didn't repeat expose them to it enough. I don't know, but they won't touch soup. But what they will touch is chicken and rice. And what was the other thing in it? Oh, carrots. So I'm like, I basically will tell you how to make the soup in a way that you can, like the chicken boils in the soup, poaches in the soup. You take it out, you shred it, you add it back. All right, when you take it out to shred it, chop it up into bites and put that on, put the bites on their plate before shredding it and then adding the chicken back to the soup. All right, you can scoop some of the carrots out before you add everything else, put those on their plate. The farro is like boiling in there too. Scoop some out with a mesh spoon or a slotted spoon. Put some of that on their plates because they're into rice, and I want to still expose them to things, right? You can't give up because every now and then your daughter eats octopus at a restaurant, right? So you have to keep showing them the things. But so that's my advice. Like think of the meal that you want and then think, okay, how can I like deconstruct if it's a pasta dish and they like won't eat a pasta with tons of stuff in it, but first you saute the sausage to add it to it. Saute the sausage, scoop out some for the kids, put that in a little pile, and like that's their meat, and then continue to do everything else. When you boil the pasta, before adding all of it to the sauce, scoop out some and they can have pasta with butter and parmesan or whatever. So just constantly be thinking of like, don't think like, okay, I can't cook that because my kids would never eat it. Think like, okay, how could I deconstruct that into something that wouldn't be scary to them? Because they're not trying to be mean to us. They're just like genuinely like, that looks terrifying. I don't want that.
I appreciate the kind of breaking it out and keeping it simple for them, and
Yeah,
I
and
think
then
a
you
lot.
still only have to cook one meal. You're just like breaking it down.
Yeah, and I like this notion of encouraging us to, not sacrifice having good, delicious, fun meals for the adults when the kids are a little picky. It does take a little creativity and a little bit of planning. I feel like I want to just go back a little bit and ask you some of your inspiration. I want to know, kind of starting like, when did you first get comfortable in the kitchen and start thinking about becoming a chef?
My mom worked full time and was also very dedicated to the idea of the family dinner. Like every single night after school, after they got home from work, we had family dinner. And watching her do that, she like hates going to the grocery store. She was working her butt off. And so she would get home and she'd be like, what can I make? And she is the master of looking at what anybody else would deem an empty refrigerator or an empty pantry and being like, bibbity bobbity boop, like I can make a meal out of this. And it's not always perfect. And it's not always like what she set out to make at the beginning, but she really makes it work. And so a big part of especially the book and the newsletter is the newsletter I started during the pandemic, right? So these were still the days when we weren't going to the grocery store extra times. If you weren't running to the grocery store for like chili powder, if you already had chicken breasts in the fridge, you weren't going to go just because a recipe called for chicken thighs. And so I started during the pandemic writing a substitution for every single ingredient. So, like chicken thighs, I'll tell you how to make it with pork tenderloin, shrimp, steak. I'll tell you the timing, everything. It honestly takes us just as long to write the substitutions list as it does to write the actual recipe sometimes because we get so detailed and granular about it. But my mom was just this incredible, like, unafraid of experimenting in the kitchen and taught us from a young age like, oh no, you don't have to go to the grocery store just because you're making chili and you're missing chili powder, like just try these spices instead. And like whatever she made would always be great. People are really afraid because they lack confidence in the kitchen to swap things around, to make substitutes. And that's one of my favorite things that I hear from my readers and from people who have my book, my newsletter, follow me on Instagram, is like, you made me feel so confident in swapping. Like I used to just be like such a strict rule follower, recipe follower. And now I know like I can, if I don't have that spice, like I can just use a different green spice. If I don't have, or that herb, if I don't have, chicken, I can just use shrimp. It just cooks for less time. And I'm like, yes. So that's the thing that makes me feel like really good and like I'm in the right place. But yeah, definitely inspiration from my mom growing up is where it all came from.
Thanks for that, Caroline. I love the idea of really encouraging us to like swap things out a little bit in the kitchen or try variations or find cookbook authors like you who offer variations. And I think it's also a little bit of a fix for people like me who are like maybe struggling to do more recipes where, if there's something in there that your kid doesn't like or you don't like, just leave it out or
Leave it
swap
out.
something in and try it. Like
Yes.
you don't, if you don't have to follow the recipe perfectly. Cause I think I always, because I'm a little bit more of a spontaneous cook. And I think maybe one of the reasons I avoid it is I think, well, I'm not going to follow the recipe perfectly. So it's not really going to work out.
And being a spontaneous cook, you're probably just using what's in the fridge, so you're like, "Oh, I can't use a cookbook. I don't I'm not gonna get all those ingredients." Like, so you asked earlier, like, "How can I start using my cookbooks more?" I would challenge you to open one of your favorite cookbooks. I don't know if you have mine yet, I'll send it to you if not. Open one of your favorite cookbooks and challenge yourself to make it no matter what. There, that one. You have that cookbook of recipes. Open Eat to
I just
Beat.
happen to have it open to the, we, you heard, I think I've not told people about this historical fact on the podcast yet. It's, you heard about the dig in ancient Rome where they're like down in like the catacombs and they found this whole like whole storage system, these urns with like kale leaves. And ancient Rome, they all ate lots of kale. It's not like a fad vegetable at all. They all walked around by saying all kale Caesar.
Yes, 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 all kale Caesar. It's so
Uh,
good.
Anyway, sorry for my bad joke there, everybody. But all kale Caesar is an amazing salad because
It's so good.
you get omega-3 fats from anchovies and all the goodness from small fish. And we all need a good anchovy recipe.
Anchovies are, I learned from Drew, so freaking good for you, for your gut, your brain. And I am not a person who, I'm not in the tin fish fad. I bet you are. I like can't pick up a tinned fish and just like chomp it down. That does not
No, I
vibe
can't do
with
that.
me.
Well, now hold on. I
You
can't
can't?
do that either. I don't think
Okay, I
that's
was
tin fish
slaughtering you.
fad. I think that's tin fish. I think that's tin fish fetish.
Yeah,
And I just like where you're like dangling it at lunch.
yes, or just like eating it on a piece of baguette. I'm like, ugh, I don't know. You're a good seafood
Although
eater, is
I
why I
did.
slotted
I
you
have to
into
say, I
that.
was at basketball practice. My son's in Wyoming, and there's a mom who'd driven in, and she pulled out a jar of pickled herring.
And you were like, "Get me in there."
No, I mean, it was a little, I said, it's a little foodie for me. And she made me, she's like, you got to try it. And I tried it. And I thought I was that type of foodie. I think that's tin fish flex right there. Even though it was in a jar, but I think the dangling eating is a little bit fetishization. But what about the tin fish? Just like the wild salmon burger in this book,
Okay, well,
which,
that too, give me,
for-
that's a different
I
thing.
mean,
That's old school. That's canned. There's canned and then there's tinned. The
oh,
canned tuna, canned salmon, we love them. But that all kale Caesar, what else is in it? What's in the dressing? Doesn't it
okay,
have
so this
Brazil
is
nuts
such
in
a great
it?
recipe. So this has a cashew crunch dressing. So it's got
Yeah.
4 anchovies, Parmesan cheese. It's got raw cashews, a couple of Brazil nuts,
Yeah, so
an
the raw
egg
cashews
yolk,
and the Brazil nuts are for creaminess, and it really, they just like blend right in.
lemon, Dijon mustard, garlic powder, kosher salt. Then you've got this pepita Parmesan crunch, which
Yes.
everyone loves this. And then the salad
I have to
is
say I've
awesome.
stolen that for some of my own recipes.
That's okay. Well, you
Uh-huh.
created it. That's
Mhm.
good.
I've borrowed it.
It's amazing for your brain. That's why, because pepitas, pumpkin seeds, everybody. And one of these things that we all kind of have around us in the grocery store, we often don't buy. Amazing source of tryptophan. First of all, the amino acid you use to make things like serotonin and melatonin, but also great for minerality, really great for zinc, which is one of these nutrients that we just don't really eat enough of. There aren't tons of food that have lots of zinc.
I will say my readers and my followers eat enough pepitas. They are one of my red bell peppers, cashews, kale, pepitas are the ones that have like stood the test of time from working on that book. Pepitas for life. Pepitas and everything. They're so good. They should. We need to like. We need to fire whoever's in charge of Big Pepita and find somebody new.
Big
Because
pepita. There's so many great the wild salmon burgers we were just talking about. I just made those again, one of those quick recipes that you don't I don't usually kind of think about. I have the and until I get into a little bit of a rhythm, or as you say, kind of this happened a while ago, just kind of making it a lot because everybody likes it. It's great. It's a good way to do wild salmon.
so like the salmon is a great example. If you were out of salmon but you had tuna, make it with tuna. Like, it would be delicious. Tuna burgers. Um, anyway, I would challenge you to open a cookbook like that one and open it to a random or I mean, find one that you really like and then challenge yourself to make it without going to the grocery store. So, like, maybe you have no chicken in the house and you just open up a chicken pot pie recipe, like, figure out a way to make it. You've got pork, don't you? Pork is, like, the same fattiness, like, pork tenderloin, same fattiness. You can do it kind of work with it the same way you can work with chicken breast. Like, make it work. Keep seasoning it, salt, seasonings until it tastes delicious. Like, just make it work using what you have in the house. I guarantee you it'll be delicious and you'll like blow yourself away. I was saying these are the messages I get that are like, Carol, I didn't have this, but I used this, this, this. And I'm like, that wasn't even close to my recipe. And it was delicious and you loved it. And that's because you swapped like 10 different things. You came up with a totally different dish and you feel so empowered. And so then you're getting that, like, again, the positive feedback loop of like, I did that. This was delicious. I loved it. Okay. Do you want to know my favorite recipe in Eat to Beat is it called sausage cassoulet or mushroom cassoulet?
Mushroom cassoulet.
It's a
Yeah.
cassoulet of some.
Tell everybody about a cassoulet as I find the recipe.
A
What's a
cassoulet
cassoulet?
is a peasant dish, French provincial peasant dish. And it's traditionally, it can be like basically whatever kind of meat you have around, meat and beans and vegetables. But we made this version that fit the, Eat to Beat standards. I had certain kind of nutritional standards I needed to hit for different chapters, right? And different vegetables or different ingredients to incorporate. And so this one has, I think, was this the chapter where we were talking about mushrooms? You were talking about mushrooms. Is that why it's mushroom?
I'm trying to think what the here it's a mushroom chicken cassoulet.
Yeah.
Everybody with the book, it's page 237. It's week 4, which is nuts, beans, and seeds. And so it's there to try and help you get more nuts, beans, and seeds in your life. And so the cassoulet is this wonderful way that we have all kinds of mushroom and chicken dishes, but the cassoulet slides in some amazing beans.
Is
And
it
so
white? It's cannellini, right?
I think so. I'm looking
And
right
it's just
now.
this like kind of creamy, like filling. It's almost sort of like
Cannellini or Great Northern beans.
get like shepherd's pie, just like a super new, like hearty plate of food. It's got this really delicious breadcrumb on top. Does it have a nutty breadcrumb on top too?
It has a nutty panko breadcrumb, and I
We
think
love a
it's
nutty
also
breadcrumb in that book.
one of those, as you were talking about kind of one pot meals earlier of, can imagine a fall day. And I think that's also where, you're really encouraging us that you find some of this that you like, make it for a few weeks, make it on Thursday night. Kind of don't make it overly complex. If you get a little bored, maybe add some microgreens, but, uh, uh,
Change out the beans, change out if you're, like, not feeling mushrooms, change the mushrooms to a traditional cassoulet has a lot of sausage in it, that's, like, one of the and we took that out to make it a little bit leaner, focus on the mushrooms for that hardiness, but, like, take out the mushrooms and swap in sausage. It won't be the exact same nutritional density that we were aiming for, but you'll be happy and it'll be delicious, like, just keep swapping out if the white beans are boring you, like, take them out, add kale in, like, whatever, switch it out, it's gonna work. I think people just need to be, like, encouraged to take more leaps
Well, I
and
think you're telling us this is how we build kitchen confidence, and that the reason
yes.
people stay timid in the kitchen, I think you gave us number one solution is you guys don't know how to use a knife, right? And the number two is you make too big of a mess. And boy, those are two big lessons for me as a cook. I don't know everybody listening whether you feel that, but those times where you have it together, you keep it clean as you're cooking, your knife skills are on point, it's sharp,
Mhm.
etc. And then times where you're just like, I don't know, you don't focus on those things, and it's just not as fun. So those are great pieces of encouragement. And then I think using that to just really mix it up, swap stuff out, build confidence by cooking more, making more choices. And I love that thing, like, there is no failure. Like, no, no, no. You keep adding stuff and mixing and matching until you make it taste good.
One of the I mean, I feel for these people, but it's also such a frustrating piece of feedback as a recipe developer is, like, when people will comment, like and you see it on, like, New York Times because people are so, New York Times cooking, people just comment and comment and comment. You'll see, like, "This was under-seasoned," and you're like, "Bob, that is a you problem." Like, every single piece of chicken has a different fattiness. Every single can of beans has a slightly different salt index. Like, every single bunch of kale tastes slightly different. Red bell peppers are a great example. Some red bell peppers, you're like, oh my God, this tastes like heaven nectar. And some are really bland, right? So you have to keep seasoning. You can't just add the 1 teaspoon of salt and be like, I'm done. Keep seasoning until it tastes delicious. If it's bland to you, like you like finish making a soup and you're like, this is boring as shit, add some curry powder, some turmeric, some cumin, some chili powder. Like the soup is not boring. You are not working hard enough. Just keep going.
These are such great takeaways, and I
Don't
really
give up. If you ever cook something and you're like, this is bland, keep going. Maybe that recipe developer was having a bland day. Maybe that tasted really good to them, but it doesn't taste good to you, and that's what matters. So just keep going.
I ask everybody at the end for their kind of mental fitness homework for the weekend, but I feel that you gave us two. You gave us this one, which is make it taste good, and then I love the challenge of everybody go to a favorite recipe book. Maybe do this after a shop, so you at least have some stuff, but just don't shop intentionally for recipe. Go find it and open it up, look through it, and then make your version of it with what you have in your home. I think that's such a wonderful challenge to be.
I would say even try to do it before a shop. So on
I know you said that, but
Sundays,
you're better at this
okay,
than
you're right. Okay, okay. I'm
you're
being a snob. But on Sundays, my favorite thing is like Sunday morning, maybe George has the kids at soccer practice, whatever. On Sunday morning, before I do my shop for the week, I'll be like, what can I make to use up that scraggly bunch of celery, that sad little carrot, that weird extra potato thing? And I'll like come up with like, okay, what can I cook right now? And obviously, I spend my whole life working on food. I totally get that I am in food all the time, and you all are in tech sales and fashion and psychiatry and all the different things, so your brain isn't as in it as mine. But look at that, open a recipe book, and if it doesn't say celery but it says carrots, use the celery instead of carrots. If it doesn't say kale but it says spinach, use your kale where it says to use spinach. Like think a little bit bigger, expand. That's your I love that. Mental health, what is it? Mental fitness homework. That's so good.
mental fitness homework. It's the price of admission for the podcast. Everyone, what a treat to be with you. I really appreciate everyone commenting, sharing, and listening, and mostly that you're taking some time to work on your mental health and your mental fitness. Nothing's better for you. Nothing's better for our community and our country. So thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you, Chef, for spending a
Oh my
wonderful hour
gosh.
with us. It's so much fun to talk with you. It's such a treat, everybody, and all of you know this in your work life when you meet someone like Chef Carolyn Chambers and you get to work on a project like this and help so many people think about nutritional psychiatry, and then to see you go on, hit the bestseller list, inspire
Oh,
so many people.
thank you.
Thank you for everything you've added to the recipes and my book, but also just for the inspiration of keeping it real, keeping it fun. You're a great follow on Instagram, everybody. If you're not following, she's Caro Chambers, Caro Chambers on Instagram. Thank you so much, everybody. It's great to be with you. Thanks for a great episode. I'll see you guys down the road. Take care.